Good morning, folks, and welcome to Worldwide Wisdom. This morning, we're learning a fascinating concept. It's transformative. This is a transformative idea. It's an idea I've been developing, and we're learning it here in our sequence of the Hanukkah redefined, Hanukkah reinterpreted. Think of what Hanukkah means to you, and think of what Hanukkah is going to mean to you this year, hopefully, as you approach Hanukkah mindfully. Remember, I don't want Hanukkah this year to be something that happens to you. I want you to make Hanukkah happen. You understand the difference? As opposed to Hanukkah just descending upon you because the calendar shows up. I want you to enter Hanukkah with the proper mindset, with a proper approach, with a proper perspective. And how we're going to do that is by confronting this magnificent idea that we're learning in this discourse of the Rebbe delivered in 1978. It's called Mitzvah Mishetishka Achama. The mitzvah of the Hanukkah lights is from the time of sunset, from the time when it becomes dark, which is the underlying theme of this discourse, is that the Hanukkah lights are unusual in the fact that they're lit in the dark and not in the light. We explained that the reason why Hanukkah lights are lit in the dark and not in the light, different to Shabbos candles, different to the lights of the menorah in the temple, which were lit for Plaga Mincha, they were lit in the daytime, an hour and a quarter before sunset, because the purpose of the Hanukkah lights is to illuminate the darkness. And what we're going to talk about today is what kind of darkness, the degree, the depth of the intensity of the darkness, which the Hanukkah lights are supposed to transform. And that doesn't happen by itself. That happens when you are mindful about the Hanukkah lights, about what you're doing, about the mitzvah, about illuminating not as an act of striking a match, but illuminating as an act of striking up your heart and your mind, right? So we learned like this. We learned that it says in the Mishnah, remember, Mishnah is code. The Mishnah doesn't say anything random. There's no poetic license in the Mishnah. It says that the time of the lighting of the Hanukkah lights is from the time that the sun sets, Mishetishka Achama, Adekalia, Ragla de Tarmudoi, until the legs, the feet of the scavengers finish in the marketplace. And we explained that to mean that the word Kalia means finish, but Kalia also means Kalois HaNefesh, the intensity, the ecstasy of the soul, the ecstasy of the soul. Have you ever seen a person transformed? Have you ever seen a person enter into a state of ecstasy where they become a different person? Have you ever seen a person dancing at the wedding of his daughter? Think The Godfather. I happened to notice that movie recently. I heard about The Godfather from so many people. I had to see parts of it. I couldn't watch the whole thing. It was too much for me. But he's at the wedding of his daughter, and apparently amongst the mafia, at the wedding of your daughter, you're allowed to ask, you can ask the father anything, and he has to say yes. Is that right? Is that the rule? Right? Because the ecstasy is transformative, right? Have you seen a person dancing? I saw a video of a chassid, an elderly chassid dancing. This guy was dancing like nobody was watching. It was like the wedding of his great-granddaughter, I think it was. He was 94 years old. And he was a survivor of either Stalin or Hitler or both, one of these kind of people. And here he is at the wedding of his great-granddaughter. He's got about 165 great-grandchildren, right? In fact, I saw a Holocaust survivor just the other day doing that. Now, he wasn't religious, but he was a Holocaust survivor in Israel, and he was just so cute. He could barely move. He was like 98 years old, but he was dancing like this, like so cute, because when you're joyous, you bring out a different person within yourself. There's a transformation that takes place within you. And this is what's happening in the Mishnah. Chassidus explains when the Mishnah tells us that the end time of the lighting of the Hanukkah lights is when the feet of the scavengers complete, Kalia, when they complete. The second meaning is elevate. Kalia is Meloshin Kolis HaNefesh, which means that the expiration of the soul, when they get so inspired that they're transformed. And what is Tarmudoi? We learned what does it mean, this funny word Tarmudoi, which means scavengers? It has the same letters as Moredet. Tarmudoi is Moredet. Moredet, which means the rebels. Rebels, Rebels. So the purpose of the lighting of the Hanukkah lights is from dark, illuminating the negative, until you have transformed, until you turned the forces of evil into what? Into light, into good. Now, this sounds like a crazy idea. How are we going to turn the forces of negativity into positivity? How are we going to turn hate into love? Is it possible to turn Hamas into an IDF unit? Can you imagine? Is that even, in which planet, in which dimension could that even be possible? So here Chassidus takes us on a deep dive. And what we learned in the previous lesson is that everything, we're redefining evil now. And what we're going to be doing is living with purpose. Because when you can identify the root of evil around you, what happens then is that you mitigate the fear and you replace fear with purpose. Because you understand what you're trying to achieve. Instead of being intimidated by the forces that block you, you're empowered that that's your mission. Listen to this. So Chassidus explains, a quick review on what we learned last time, is that everything in creation, every single thing in creation, everything comes from God. And it's created by God. Remember the doctrine of perpetual creation. So God creates everything at every single moment in time. Free choice we still have, right? Good question you had yesterday. Now, Ein Eid Milvade means there's nothing else besides him, means that there is nothing else besides him. Not even Nasrallah, not even Iran, right? Not even HTS, the new terrorist group that nobody ever heard of before, right? There is no such thing as something which is outside of God. Because if there was something outside of God, it would be an idol, it would be idolatrous, right? It would be two gods, or three or four. Now, we said that if everything comes from God, then everything should be aligned with God. It should be good. So why is it that some things are bad? And we explained through that beautiful metaphor from Tanya of how the embryo evolves over 9 months into the brain, which resembles the origin, the father, and the toenail, which does not actually resemble the brain of the father. You look at a toenail, you look at the brain of the father, they don't look like the same thing. They look actually very, very different. The brain is a thinking genius, and the toenail is a toenail, for heaven's sake. I mean, you got to be honest, it's just a toenail. But through 9 months of descent, it evolved. This is evolution. It evolved into something which is very, very different in exactly the same way. We are all the souls of our generation, every single soul of the Jewish people in this generation comes from Chachmei Lah, comes from God's wisdom. Why? Because we're God's children. So just like a child originates in the father's brain, so too, we all, souls of Israel, originate in God's brain, God's mind. What did I just say? Chachmei Lah, right? So now, when our souls descend into this world, what happens is some souls retain their original status. They identify with where they came from, and those are the tzaddikim of the generation. But other souls, they go down into becoming toenails, right? It's just a great descent. They go all the way down. Some stay like a lung, a heart, some like you look at a person's face, right? What happens to a person's face? A face is not a brain, but the face has like radiance associated to it, right? There's a soul. You look into a person's eyes, you see their soul. So the eyes are kind of close to the brain because you look at a person's eyes. In a firing squad. They cover the eyes of the victims. Why is that? You ever heard of this idea? They cover that because even you see the executions, terrible things that they do out there in Syria, amongst these terrible terrorists. What they do is they try not to look into the eyes of the people that they're killing, because it's very difficult to kill someone. Apparently, so I've heard. When you're looking at them in the eye, because their soul is shining, they need to cover their eyes, because not that the victim shouldn't see, but that the executioner shouldn't have to look. You don't agree with that? You don't like that?
I mean, when you have ISIS and those guys.
Yeah, I'm attributing some degree of humanity. You're saying you wouldn't even accept that degree of humanity in them. No, interesting. And listen, it's just an idea that I came across. Anyway, so point being is that the eyes are expressive of some degree of spirituality, similar to the brain, which is very spiritual, or the emotions of the heart, or the intellect of the brain. But the toenails don't have any spirituality to them. You look at a toenail, you don't really get inspired too much, right? So too, there's different degrees of descent of souls. Some souls are just carbon copies of their origin. They're just tzaddikim, rabbeim, rosh yeshivas, just amazing spiritual people, right? And then you got people that go all the way down. Now, who's at the very, 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 very bottom of the barrel? These are the forces of evil. What we called in the language of Hasidus interruptions, reductions, screens, and shatterings. These are souls that descend through hefsek, tzimtzum, mosach, shavira. So, for example, if you have a lampshade, I give an example of a light, and as a little lampshade, then you can see the light behind. It's very nice. But if you put a brick wall, right? Or if you have a mechitza, then a mechitza is gonna like really like stop the light from coming through. But if you have a brick wall, there's gonna be no light coming through. So that's what happens when the origin is like really blocked. Then what happens as a result of that is forces of negativity that actually actively oppose God. Now, what is their origin? The origin is still in God, but they've lost their way. This is like the wayward child. Imagine if you have a few kids, right? And your kids are frum and they're religious and they're observant and it's great and it's amazing and they're like learning Torah and they're doing everything, they're keeping up your legacy. But then you got one kid that just didn't get the memo, right? This kid went off the deep end and I don't know, he's in Thailand and it's Yom Kippur and he's not whatever with the program, right? So think about that. Same family, right?
NGO.
Who?
This guy who just executed this healthcare guy.
Yeah, exactly. Like what happened over there? This guy who killed the United Healthcare CEO. Like everybody's kind of bewildered. Like what? Why? Who? Well, I don't know enough about the story to comment. So I'm not going to comment on it. But I had other things in my mind this week. Thank you, my new PR agent here. But what I want to say is that so let's say you're a religious family and one kid falls off the wagon. They call it OTD. Ever heard of OTD? You know what that means, Jonathan? Off the derech. The derech is the way, and there's OTD. He fell off the wagon, right? You know, there's different codes you need to know. There's BT, there's FFB. You know what this is? FFB, BT. FFB means from birth. You know, if you're going for a shidduch or something, you need to know these codes, right? FFB means from birth. FFB, are you an FFB? And then there's a BT. A BT is a Baal Teshuvah, right? Baal Teshuvah, right? Baal Teshuvah is a guy that sort of fell off the wagon. He was OTD, but then he became BT. Maybe he was an FFB who became an OTD, and then he became a BT.
And then there are the rest of us. And then there's the BF. And is there a hierarchy? Is there a pecking order?
Anyways, bottom line is. So what happens to this kid in the family that he fell off the wagon? Now, some families might ostracize the kid. Some families might ostracize the kid. You know the family that yeah, you know, what's his name? This kid comes back in college, this from kid. He goes to college and he falls off the wagon. And he comes back to introduce his parents to his new Indian girlfriend. And the story goes, help me out here. Help me out. How's the story? And he introduces
introduces her.
And she has an Indian name.
Yeah, he says, I want you to meet
the woman I'm going to marry.
This is his Rabbi, Rebbetzin, father, mother, right? Okay, fine.
Her name is, then she says, nice to meet you, Mrs. Goldberg. My name is Singing Song.
Singing Song. Okay, that's her name.
Whatever, and what should I call you? She said, you can call me Sitting Shiva.
You can call me Sitting Shiva, right? You see, okay. This is actually a real thing, by the way. This actually was a real thing in days gone by, that in former generations, people really struggled to embrace children that maybe married out. It was very, very hard for them. And they would rice kriya. They would sometimes tear kriya and sort of cut them off. Because also remember different times in those days when somebody, you know, went, think about like in Germany or in Europe before the war, it was very, very seductive, the whole mindset, you know, the Enlightenment movement. When you went into that direction, it was like a one-way vacuum. There was no way out of there. You know, it was very difficult. Today, we live in a different world. It's a free world. People are becoming religious all the time. Anyways, bottom line is that when you realize that all these kids, the kid that's religious and the kid that's not religious. And how about if a kid becomes not just not religious, but he becomes pro-Hamas? How about that? How about if your kid became a pro-Hamas activist and he's marching with Greta von Thunberg, the great enlightened scholar of our times, right? Who thankfully didn't make it to the person time of the year.
She's raising money for Hamas.
Who's it? What?
Kamala's adopted daughter.
Right. Well, she's not. Is she Jewish? Yeah.
Yeah.
Fine. So let's say you got someone that's like, I mean, think about like a politician. Imagine if there was an American Jewish politician that was promoting Hamas and fighting against Israel. Just imagine if there was such a thing, right? Then what would happen? Then what would happen? No lashon hara. So what would happen? Would you cut such a person off, Or do you say all these souls originate in Chachmei Ilah, in the supernal wisdom of God Almighty, just like a human being, B'nai B'chei Yisrael, that the Jewish people are the firstborn son of God Almighty, and like a human being comes from the brain of his father. Tanya chapter 2 tells us that a soul and a neshama comes from the Chachma, the brain of God, from the brain of God. It's anthropomorphic. It's the wisdom of God, right? So what that means, even this evil politician comes from God's wisdom. How does this happen? Because he fell very far away. There was a storm and the apple fell very far away from the tree. Now, when you have this mindset and you look at your fellow Jew, now I hear from some fellow Jews here in this area, they tell me, I have no use for that Jew. I have no use for that Jew. And I find that very arrogant. I find it very out of touch. How can you speak about a fellow Jew like that? He's part of you. He's part of your family. It's like saying, I have no use for my left hand. You can't say that. That's suicidal. It's my fellow Jew. Now, you don't like him? Okay, we got to figure that out. The guy's very sick. Look at him as someone who's very, very sick, lost his way, and he thinks that right is wrong. He thinks that down is up, right? Like Yeshayahu says, they call mar lemasik and masik mar. Isaiah says, they call light dark and dark they call light, bitter they call sweet and sweet they call bitter. Okay, so the guy's confused. He needs medicine. But that doesn't mean you have to amputate. It means you got to help him. You got to heal him. Imagine one of your kids is very sick. You don't say, you know who did this? Who did this was Hagar. Hagar, the mother of Ishmael. When Hagar and Ishmael were kind of kicked out of the house in the Torah portion, right? So she runs out of water. So what does she do? What would you do if you ran out of water? If you had a kid and you ran out of food, would you throw away the food or throw away the kid? She threw away the kid. She threw the kid behind one of the bushes, right? I mean, this is like a little crazy. She said, look, I can't figure this out, so I'm letting go of the child.
You don't want to see the kid die, though.
You want to let him die by himself? Seriously? At least let him die in your arms. Interesting conversation. Anyways, point being is that you never let go. You don't let go of someone you love. You hold on tight, and if they're sick, they need you more. So you look at a fellow Jew that is maybe politically opposed to you, that maybe is fighting against Judaism, is fighting against Torah. Okay, so you don't agree with them, fine, but you can't amputate them. They're part of you, right? It's a soul that originates the same place as you did. It's not even a brother soul. We're all part of one essence. And now you realize that they fell far from the tree. So that's exactly how Chassidus explains to us who the Taramudoi are in the Hanukkah story. The rebels that we are trying to illuminate till the feet of the rebels are no longer in the marketplace, is talking the Taramudoi, the Kali Ragla, the Taramudoi is the end of the time of the Hanukkah lighting in the Mishnah. Where's this Mishnah listed in Gemara Shabbos 21b. There we learn that the purpose of the lighting of the Hanukkah lights is to turn the forces of evil, forces of negativity, the forces of ego back to their source. Now, if you're looking at evil as a second authority besides for God, it's going to be very difficult to try to bring these negative forces home. But if you come with a helicopter view that everything is from Hashem, everything is from God. There is nothing outside of Hashem. There is only Hashem. Ein oid milvadoi. Nothing else aside of God. Not even Nasrallah. Not even Hezbollah. Not even Houthis. Not even Iran. Not even the forces of political views that you disagree with. Then when you come with that view, you say they too are a piece of God. They just got lost. It's much easier for us to approach them with empowerment as opposed to with fear. Yes.
So in the Amida, we talked about this before. Let there be no hope for informers, and may all the heretics and all the wicked instantly perish. So we're talking about.
So you're quoting the Amidah. This is the 19th blessing of the Amidah, where it says that we're praying for the elimination of the forces of evil.
And the heretics.
I'll tell you a beautiful story.
And what is a heretic? Is it a Jew?
A heretic is a confused Jew.
So we're talking about just what we're saying, a politician.
So let me just tell you a beautiful story from the Mishnah. The Mishnah tells us a story about Beruria, Rabbi Meir from the Gemara, or from the Mishnah, right? Rabbi Meir. He lived in a rough neighborhood. He must have lived in an HOA, in a homeowners association, because his neighbors were making his life so miserable he wanted them to die. He must have lived in a gated community. It must be. They're telling him to paint his roof again, and he had the wrong color, and he had to spray power spray his driveway, and his dog pooped somewhere. Must have been, I don't know, but he wanted to pray that they should die. Okay, His wife, Brewery, was a very, very wise woman. She says to her husband, Rabbi Meir, does it say in the verse, Yitamu choitim min haaretz? Mari, I want you to listen to this. I'm asking you a question. He says, does it say Yitamu choitim min haaretz? Does it say in the verse in Tehillim, which we say in Rosh Chodesh, does it say, and sinners shall be removed from the land? It doesn't say that, says Brewer. It says Yitamu chatoyim min haaretz. Sins shall be removed from the land, not the sinners. Hold on, I want to finish the story. So she explained to him, it doesn't say that the sinners should be removed from the land. It says the sins should be removed from the land. And therefore, don't pray that they should die. Pray that they should be transformed. Pray that the sin within them should be removed. The sin within them should be cleansed. And then what you going to have left? A beautiful Jew, a brother. In other words, you look at it. You imagine your own brother became a Nazi. I'm going to exaggerate. Imagine your brother became a Nazi. Would you want to pray that he die? I mean, there are some Jews that are like that, right? Would you rather pray that he dies, or do you pray that the Nazi within him should die? That's what we're praying. There's a beautiful story about it. I think it was the Klausenberger Rebbe. Just one quick story. There was a Klausenberger Rebbe. I'm on a roll here. I'm sorry. So.
That's not what it says. That's not what it
I'm getting that. All right. Okay. One more. I'm getting that one more story.
Okay.
So the Klausenberger Rebbe was trying to get a minyan. It was after the Holocaust. And they needed a 10th man. And it was after the Holocaust. He had like tens of thousands of Hasidim that were massacred by the Nazis. I think his wife and 11 children all also were killed. Terrible, terrible story. I mean, the guy, for him to even survive emotionally after the war, spiritually. Right, Cluj, Klausenberg, yeah. So here's what happens. Oh, Garrett, good to see you. So then what happens is he's back in the Lower East Side or something, and he's trying to get a minyan, and there's a 10th man, there's a Jew in there sitting on the park bench on Shabbos. And what's the Jew doing? Smoking a cigarette. On Shabbos. You know a sin that is to smoke a cigarette on Shabbos. You're lighting a fire every time you puff. So he tells his son to get that Jew to come. And the son looks at the father, he's like, that's a Jew? That's a Jew! He's smoking a cigarette on Shabbos! Recognized him, he was a fellow survivor. The Klausenberger Rebbe said to his son, the Jew is not smoking the cigarette. The Jew on the bench is not smoking the cigarette. It's the Nazi that's smoking the cigarette. This is a Jew whose faith was shattered by his traumatic experience in the Holocaust. It's not him who's smoking the cigarette. It's the Nazi. Get the Nazi out of here. Don't bring the Nazi into shul. Bring just the Jew into shul. In other words, when it says in the verse that you quote, it says v'cholaminim that the heretics should be extirpated, whatever that means, right? It sounds pretty intense, right? It means not that the totality of the Jew should be extirpated. It means that the evil within him, just cut the cancer out and keep the good. It doesn't mean that it's binary, good or bad. The entire thing, throw it out. If you've got a banana with a little bad spot, you chuck out the whole banana, you take the little thing out. Your wife would throw out the whole thing. Okay, well, I'm not. That's why I'm trying to modify. Yeah.
Is it possible, Rabbi, that darkness or evil in the world is necessary in order to stimulate light and goodness?
Is it possible, Jack is asking, that the purpose of darkness is here in order to stimulate a greater light? And the answer is absolutely yes. That's what we're about to say. It's very, very profound analysis. Let me just do the following. I'm going to read it inside, just the next piece, because Hanukkah is coming up sometime soon, and at the pace we're going one line a week, we're not doing too well. So let me just read a little bit, and you'll see I want to get to that point in just a moment, right? So let's just read this idea that I spoke about, that I explained in the text, okay? Similarly, the origins of the setting of the sun. We said the lighting of the menorah, the mechanical lights, is from the setting of the sun until the Tarmudoi are removed from the marketplace, right? The rebels. Similarly, the origins of the setting of the sun is exile. And the marketplace, which is a place of public domain we spoke about, it's a place where instead of looking at the world in a unilateral perspective where you see something holistic, you see unity within everything. It's a Rishus HaYochid. In the public domain, you see many, 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 many authorities, right? So we're taking the marketplace, which is a place where God is not prevalent. It's not Hashem Echad. And the Tarmudoi, these rebels, are all actually rooted within holiness. But They descend into creation through a transformative intermediary step that conceals their original source, such as interruptions, reductions, shatterings, etc. Now, what the Rebbe is about to say is something amazing. Who was the most famous anti-Semite, at least one of the most famous early anti-Semites, was Pharaoh. Pharaoh, right? Now, Moses is dealing with this great anti-Semite. Does this mean, Rabbi, that Pharaoh too was rooted in godliness? The Pharaoh that enslaved the Jewish people in Egypt for 210 years, 86 of which were brutal oppression? And the answer is right here, parenthetically. The Rebbe connects this with the concept of Pharaoh, who is mentioned in the Torah portion of Vayigash, the portion of the week during which this discourse was delivered. That Pharaoh comes from an extremely lofty source within holiness. Commenting on the name Paroi, the word Paroi, the name Paroi, the Zohar says, the Ispriu v'Isgalion minei kol nehirim, which means from him, the source of Pharaoh, all lights are itperiu, are uncovered. The word Paroi is itperiu according to the Zohar, which means that the source of all lights are uncovered through Pharaoh. This word is grammatically related to the word Pharaoh, and they are revealed, which means that Pharaoh is actually rooted in a very, very lofty power of spirituality, which descended very, very low, and from him, the source of Pharaoh, all lights are uncovered. So yes, on a manifestation level, he looks very, very toxic. But at his core, he's actually very, very elevated, which is why it says in the Parsha that Moses says in Parsha Shmois, I think it was a Va'ira, it says, Vayem Hashem al Moshe, Hashem says to Moshe, Boi el Paroi. Boi el Paroi means, Parsha's boy, come to Pharaoh. He doesn't say go to Pharaoh. Lech el Paroi. He says, Boy el Paroi, come to Pharaoh. Why would you say come? Come means come to Papa, right? As opposed to go to the enemy. The Zohar explains that when you say Boy el Paroi, it means that God is saying Pharaoh's with me. Pharaoh is a part of me. He's like, come. Pharaoh is higher than Moses. And Moses has to come to Pharaoh. This is mind-blowing, right? As opposed to going out to some distant dispatch evil, right? However, because this level descends into creation through the process referred to as shattering, it results in an anti-Semite in Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, whom the verse refers to as the great serpent who crouches within the river and says, Liya oiri va'ani asisini, the Nile river is mine and I created myself. That's what Pharaoh would say. He made himself into a god, right? Denying his reliance on God. So Pharaoh actually made himself into deity, right? Which is the spiritual origin of Pharaoh. What were you going to say?
Well, maybe the answer is not that Ein Ra Min Hashemayim, but Gam Ra Min Hashemayim.
Okay, so this is beautiful. So Andy's saying like this. He says, not that there's no evil from above, but rather that even evil is from above. Not that there is no evil from above. Andy wants to redefine what the Shalom HaKadosh says. Rabbi Shaya Levi Horowitz, the great Kabbalist, he says that not that there is no evil from above, but rather that even evil is from above. But what does that lead you to conclude? If even evil is from above, it means, think of you're the father, and you've got little children, right? And to one kid, you give a candy. And to the other kid, you give a patchin ponim, right? You know what a patchin ponim is? Right? A slap across the face, right? Why would you do that? Because here you're good and here you're evil? No. If you figure out what happened, you do forensic reports, you'll find out that the second kid was playing with fire. Or he was running into the road, and the father gave him a patchin ponim, not because he hates him, but because he loves him. It was an act of love, right? So ultimately, when you say that even evil is from God, what you mean to say is, and this is the shock statement of the Kabbalist, of Rabbi Shaya Levi Horowitz in Shalom HaKadosh, is that he's saying, there is no evil from above, right? Now, what the Maimer is going to say, one more point that I want to conclude with here is, to your point, Jack, the higher you are, the lower you fall. And therefore, when you find a particular force of evil in this world, knowing that evil is also rooted in godliness, when you got two sons, one son is very religious like dad, and the other son is marching with Hamas, right? Marching with Hamas and trying to raise money for Hamas humanitarian rockets, right? Okay, so you got these two sons. So is it that they're both the same? The answer is no. The higher you go, the lower you fall. Remember we spoke a few weeks ago why Yitzchak wanted to bench. Who did he want to bench? Which one of his sons did he want to bless? Esav. Yitzchak wants to bless Esav. Esav is the hunter, he's the axe thrower, right?
Like you guys.
As opposed to Yaakov, who's the scholar. What, Yitzchak didn't get the memo? Yitzchak was cognitively impaired, God forbid? Not at all. We learned about this. Yitzchak understood this principle that the higher you go, the lower you fall. And if Esav has become as manifesting in a more crude, more coarse, more evil son, it means that his root is higher.
The problem here is the same problem we have most times. You explain the how, but not the why. Why is the parent who has 10 children, 9 of whom go this way and 1 goes that way? What's the why?
What's the why?
What, same family? Same family?
I think Jack
Same
answered that
education?
question. I think Jack answered that question with his question. Because Jack said the purpose of evil is to bring out a greater light. That's what he said. In other words, imagine if you ran a business, Rob, without any competitors. Imagine if you never had competitors. Imagine that you never had competitors. What would happen to your business?
Flourish.
Would it? Okay. Flourish? Is that true?
Google,
Google?
Amazon, no competitors.
Amazon has competitors.
No.
Not really.
What about
Not
Walmart? Doesn't Walmart do
That's
jets
not-
or
you
something?
You don't
No?
have competitors.
There's no
You become-
competitors.
You become complacent.
Here's an entrepreneur. Look at this guy. You're a lawyer. This is an entrepreneur. Yeah. No, of course you become competitive. Hello, have you ever heard of the United States Postal Service? They have no competitors.
Well, that's worthless.
Exactly. Yeah, you send them a letter. Maybe it will arrive. I don't know.
That's not a business. That's part of the government. The government.
Oh, very good. The government is a good example of a business without any competitors. You can't even call it a business
No, it's not.
because it's complacent. That's why. But when you have competitors, now you better deliver the goods. Otherwise, you're going to be relegated into the dustbins of history. Okay? And here what happens is that's the competitors that bring out skills, talents, and ideas that you never would have otherwise dreamed of. Think of what would happen to an airplane if the airplane didn't face opposing forces, opposing winds. What would happen to the airplane? It wouldn't crash. It would never get off the ground. It's the opposing wind that lets it soar. Do you agree?
Yes.
Yeah, evil also brings out fear and courage.
Evil brings out fear as a knee-jerk reaction, but courage as a
But you're
mindful,
talking
as a
about-
mindful response, which is the educated mindset of the enlightened, conscious Jew who's able to say, "I am not afraid of the snake." Remember what happens when the snakes fight the Jews in the desert? Remember what happens when Moses says to them? Think about this a moment. It's a beautiful metaphor. When the snakes bit the Jews in the desert and they were suffering, God tells Moses to make a snake, a copper snake, put it on a pole, right? And he says, "V'hayakol anashuch," and it shall be anyone who is bitten. V'hibit el nechash anachoishes v'choy. He will look up at the snake and he will live. In other words, the point was that you had to stare your snake in the eye and see it above with a bright blue sky behind, recognizing that the snake that bit you is nothing more than an agent of God on high. And if you can reset it, then you'll be healed. What?
Jeff, you're talking about the effect on others.
No,
I'm talking about that individual. So fine. So the evil makes other people good, but what about the
but
person
can
with
I
evil?
just answer that, Bob? Without fear, there's no fearlessness.
Without fear, there's no fearlessness. Exactly. You'd be a boring life without fear. And I want to answer your question. Rob, to answer your question. Rob, you asked, so what about the individual himself? Okay, so let me make it very personal. As opposed to talking about somebody who's spiritually evil, let's talk about somebody that suffered trauma, which is something which a lot of us can relate to. Okay? Trauma, which is abuse in our relationships, in our families, in our schools, emotional, sexual, physical, spiritual, mental, financial, all sorts of traumas, right? So why would that person need to experience trauma? Think about that for a moment. I believe very strongly that trauma is not a pleasant experience. In fact, it's extremely unpleasant. And trauma can destroy you. But if not, that the person would have endured that trauma, he would never have been able to reach the heights that he ultimately reaches. And the proof is the 12 steps. You talk to an addict, a recovering addict, a sober an addict who became sober. These people are spiritual. These people have discovered a depth in them, the members of our community that are just spiritually enlightened in manners that they, in their own admission, they'll tell you this never would have happened to me if not for those awful experiences. So the purpose of the evil is just like Jack said. He said it straight up from the beginning. The purpose of the darkness is in order to bring out within you a greater light. That's what it's for. But the chassid, the mimer continues by saying over here, the mimer continues by saying something profound. Hey, guys, these are meditative concepts. This is not a mimer you can just read and in one ear and out the other. You got to really read this over and over and reflect and watch the videos and whatever. But he says over here, the higher you are, the lower you fall. And that's why Yitzchak wanted to bless Esav more than Yaakov. Not that Yitzchak didn't understand that maybe Esav is a good kid. Of course he understood who Esav was. Well, we learned about this. Remember when he was asking about tithing of the salt and the tithing the straw, right? We learned about that, right? Point is that Yitzchak understood, he perceived the spiritual source of his children. And you recognize that Yaakov was lower than Esav. Based on the principle that whatever is highest falls the lowest, we see that these lowest aspects of creation, which is exile, the marketplace, and the Tar Mudoi, the rebels, have an extremely lofty spiritual source, just like Pharaoh. If Pharaoh is lower than Moses, you know what it means? It means it's higher. Chassidus explains, you know what? You know there's 4 strata in creation. Human, animal, vegetable kingdom, and inanimate, right? So which is the highest? Human, obviously, right? Chassidus explains, why is it that the human being needs to eat food, needs to eat animals, and needs to eat vegetables in order to find sustenance? You know why? Why is it not the other way around? If we're higher, then we should be sustaining them, not them sustaining us. It's because their spiritual root is higher than ours. When you have a wall that falls, the bricks that are highest fall furthest away. That's the analogy given over there. Well, you do eat salt and you do drink water for sustenance, which is inanimate. Therefore, when a person refines, so check this out, guys. Check this out. What the Hanukkah lights are doing. Take a look. Take a look at what happens when you light those Hanukkah lights. Therefore, when a person refines these lowest aspects of creation, when you have the courage to venture deep into the dark wintry night on a Hanukkah light and illuminate that darkness by using them. For when you refine these lowest aspects of creation by using them for their intended purpose within the service of God, when you do that, using the darkness for a holy purpose, he is able to elevate them to their extremely lofty spiritual source, which is even greater than that which enters creation as revealed holiness. This is similar to the refinement of Pharaoh, the lower aspect of creation, which was specifically accomplished by Moses. It took a Moses to handle Pharaoh, who was granted the ability to refine the Pharaoh when God commanded him, come to Pharaoh. Furthermore, since every descent is for the sake of an ascent to an even greater level, like you say, the purpose, you wanted to know the why? Since the purpose of every descent is for the sake of an ascent to an even greater level, Yerida L'Tzeirach Aliyah, when the lowest aspects of creation are refined, they're not just brought to status quo. When the victim of abuse finds healing, he doesn't just become a normal person. He becomes an extremely sensitive, extremely aware and conscious person. They are elevated to a level that is loftier than the original source from which they descended and fell. Which means the Hanukkah story, the Hanukkah experience is not even a story only of an ancient people in an ancient time. It's a story of us facing our own darkness. It's a story of us dealing with the darkness in our own personal traumas, in the traumas of anti-Semitism around us, in our family members, in the animosity and contempt of your brother-in-law who says, you go to Chabad? What did the rabbi do to you? Right? It's that approach, which this is the darkness that we are confronting. It's the self-hating Jews, the self-loathing Jews. It's the Esau within yourself and within ourselves that we have the courage to confront on these 8 days of the year, to be able to face the darkness, to infuse it with holiness, to use the darkness for a mitzvah, to say to the darkness, I am not afraid of you. To say to your brother-in-law that mocks your shul attendance, to say to him, I know who you are. I know that you are sourced in godliness too. And I know that you too are just a lost soul. He might not appreciate it if you say it to him straight up, but say it in your own mind. And when you say to him, I know who you are, I know that you're just a pharaoh. And in fact, I know that because you fell so low, that's why I know that you originate from so high. And that's why it's extra important for me to make sure that you get inspired, come and join me to light the Hanukkah lights. Let me share with you something that blew my mind that I learned in shul. And when you can do that, you will have turned that force of apathy or indifference or contempt and animosity to somebody that says, you know, I like that. And what you're doing now is you're turning darkness into a far greater light than there was before. Amen.
Amen.
Strike the clock. Thank you, Rabbi.